Hello, everyone. Welcome to today's live broadcast, Technology, Friend or Foe, Considerations for Practical Execution of a Risk-Based Monitoring Strategy. I'm Lisa Henderson, the Editorial Director of Applied Clinical Trials, and I'll be your moderator for today's event. We are pleased to bring you this web seminar presented by Applied Clinical Trials and sponsored by Remarque Systems. Remarque Systems is a provider of solutions for risk-based monitoring, in-process analytics, and continuous development for data quality improvement. Headquartered in Raleigh, North Carolina, with a development center in Indianapolis, Remarque Systems has developed the first fully integrated workflow system to design, deploy, and manage clinical trials. For more information about the Remarque Systems platform, please visit the company's website at www.remarquesystems.com or email at info@remarquesystems.com. We have a few important announcements before we begin. This webcast is designed to be interactive, and we do encourage you to ask questions during the event. You can submit questions by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found on the right-hand side of your screen. You can enlarge the slide window by clicking on the small square icon in the upper right-hand corner of the slide window, or by hovering your mouse over the lower right-hand corner and dragging the window to the desired size. The slides will advance automatically during the event. If you have any technical problems viewing or hearing this presentation, please click on the question mark help widget in the dock at the bottom of your presentation window. I would now like to introduce today's speakers. We are pleased to be joined today by Crystal Stone and Amanda Coogan. After 2 years of undergraduate cancer research as a biomedical engineer, Crystal started her career in clinical research in 2002 as a data manager. Over the next 12 years, while working at both mid-size and large medical device companies, she gained experience in several other key clinical research roles, including clinical research associate, study manager, and clinical director. During her tenure in clinical research, she supported both domestic and international studies in several therapeutic areas, including cardiac, urology, neurology, and pelvic health. In 2014, Crystal transitioned from the medical device industry to the software industry to support quality risk management, risk-based monitoring. Her role as a consultant and subject matter expert to small and large pharma, medical device, and CROs has given her broad exposure to how companies are implementing risk management and risk-based monitoring. Amanda started her career in clinical research in 2003 as a clinical research coordinator at a large university hospital. Starting in 2007 and continuing for the next 7 years, she worked at both mid-size and large-size medical device companies and as an independent consultant, where she gained experience in several key clinical research roles, including clinical trial manager, clinical research associate, and CRA manager. During her tenure in clinical research, she supported both domestic and international studies in several therapeutic areas, including oncology, which comprised breast, cardiothoracic, and hepatic, as well as urology, neurology, and pelvic health. In 2015, she transitioned from the medical device industry to the software industry to support quality risk management and risk-based monitoring. Her role as a consultant, subject matter expert, and project manager to small and large pharma, medical device, and CRO customers has also given her a broad exposure to how companies are implementing risk management and RBM. So thank you both for joining us today. And Crystal, would you like to get us started?
Yes, thank you, Lisa. Well, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, and welcome to our Technology, Friend or Foe webinar. We wanted to start off the presentation by saying that we appreciate you taking the time to join us today, and we hope that we'll provide you with some helpful insights based on our experience partnering with different customers to implement our RBM technology. If you've ever used a technology, you know exactly what our webinar title means. Sometimes technology can feel both like a benefit and a burden. Our goal is to try to help you to get to the benefit phase earlier. There's a technology component in almost everything we touched today. Some of those technologies require setup prior to them becoming useful. Sometimes that setup and even using the technology can feel daunting and frustrating. For example, how many times have you tried to join a WebEx or a Skype meeting and it won't load or the audio doesn't work because you needed some add-on for it to function? But in most cases, once you get over the hurdles, there is value in the technology. Our goal during this webinar is to give you exposure to where we've seen issues prior to, during, and after a technology implementation, so you can proactively minimize and mitigate the frustration. We will be posing several questions for you and your organization to think about, as well as giving examples of where we've seen success and failure during implementation. Let's talk a little bit about risk-based monitoring. First, monitoring has multiple meanings. The 4 items listed on the slide are from the dictionary. I show you this because many people assume a risk-based monitoring technology ties only to the CRA. How do we reduce SDV, or how do we reduce on-site monitoring visits? But today, when Amanda and I talk to you about RBM technology, we mean software that gives you and your team visibility to your whole study, allowing you to manage and mitigate your risks to ensure your study stays on track. Software that enables consistent communication across your entire study team. And software that gives you ongoing oversight of your patients and sites, as well as the overall study, so you can make the right decisions, whether that decision be about SDV or on-site monitoring visits, or about the safety of your product, or whether you need to shut down a site due to issues. When we talk about RBM technology today, that is what RBM means to us.
So I'd like to now ask our audience to participate in a brief polling question, and you just have to click directly on the screen and then hit submit to your answer. So the question is, why are you looking to implement an RBM technology? Keep in mind you can select more than one answer, so that your choices are quality oversight, enhanced communication, safety oversight, cost savings, risk management, GCP compliance, or you're not looking to implement. And I'll just go through that one more time. And again, you just need to click on as many as are applicable to you and hit submit to why are you looking to implement an RBM technology? Quality oversight to enhance communication, safety oversight, cost savings, risk management, GCP compliance, or you're not looking to implement. And I'll just give you a couple more seconds and then we'll look at the results. And results. So we have a lot of answers there, Crystal. So the number one, however, we're kind of tied between quality oversight and risk management. Did you want to comment?
Yes. So thank you for responding. And I think the results of this poll lead into the next slide, which is that these are really the items that we see from our experience with our customers over the last 5 years. These are really the drivers for our customers as to what they're trying to focus on to enhance or improve. And that ultimately leads them to implementing a technology for risk management in RBM. We've obviously seen different motivations between our customers, but we've also seen different motivations even within the same organization, meaning the end users of the software. All of these different wants and needs make for a really robust technology implementation, but it can also lead to some headaches when there are conflicting priorities. When we say technology implementation, at a high level, here's what that looks like. So step one is data comes into a technology platform, and ideally it can come from any clinical trial source. Step two, the platform then aggregates and analyzes the data. And then step three, the output of that analysis would be visualizations and or actionable outputs which would be available to the end user. And typically we see this as the sponsor and CRO personnel. Ideally, you'd want to be able to see patient, site, and study level information. And I suggest this again, because not all organizations or users are using the technology for the same end goal. And sometimes the use of the technology actually evolves over time within the same organization. The three foundational components for a successful implementation are people, processes, and technology, which you've probably seen multiple times before if you've ever attended any other RBM presentation. So this is not new information. But on the next several slides, Amanda will be walking you through the questions you and your organization will want to consider and answer prior to a technology implementation, so your implementation has the least amount of headaches.
Great, thank you, Crystal. The right people can and most likely will come from multiple different departments within an organization, whether that's clinical operations, data management, safety, IT, training, stats, or regulatory, the list goes on. But each person provides value in different ways during an implementation. So let's dive into the considerations for building the right team. We'll start with your owners and drivers of the technology implementation. It's crucial to establish and clearly define who owns and drives this process. Is it ClinOps? Is it data management, IT, or quality? More often than not, we've seen confusion in this area, which leads to stalls and delays. And who's driving your alignment of purpose? This is someone who is making sure that all stakeholders involved understand why you are using this technology. Is it for risk tracking and mitigation, data cleaning, patient safety, trial oversight, site management, and is everyone on the same page? Also, who is driving the internal communication and overseeing the change management as it pertains to the people and the processes that will be affected by the implementation? This person makes sure that everyone knows how this will all take place and ensures that processes are updated or put in place that provide the framework to execute the how. And then who is getting organizational buy-in? Who is making sure that all parties involved are invested in the why and the how? You're ensuring that all departments who need to contribute have the resources and they understand the impact on their department. For example, if clinical operations is owning and driving this process, do you have buy-in from data management or programming or IT? Do they know that they're needed? And do they have the resources and bandwidth to support you? And next, on to decision makers. Who is making decisions? Your decision makers may be the same or different from your owners and drivers. They can come from different departments depending on how you plan to use your technology. You need people who can make decisions regarding things like who is going to be using the system, how will they be using it, what are the risks in your study, what about thresholds, how will the system be used to mitigate your risks, who will mitigate and resolve. And your subject matter experts. Do the current people in your organization have the right background and skill set to contribute to your RBM strategy? For example, if you're using the system to track study risk, do you have personnel who understand how to complete a risk assessment with clearly defined, measurable, high-priority risks or KRIs? Do you have someone that can provide protocol expertise? Do you have someone to provide clinical operations guidance for your end users? Like, what will a CRA do with a system alert that indicates that a KRI threshold has been reached? Do you have database or IT technical support for data transfers? If not, do you need additional resources or vendor support? And your users. Who are the end users of the system? Is it your study managers, on-site or central CRAs, CRA manager, data manager, or a safety reviewer? And does everyone use the system in the same way? For example, a safety reviewer could be reviewing patient lab values or AEs. A CRA could track site performance to establish monitoring visit frequency. Regulatory personnel could review site performance to identify sites that are a potential audit risk. Or a study manager can track regulatory or startup documentation. Thinking about your end users early on in the process ensures that you're setting up the system in a way that is most useful and efficient and saves time and money on post-implementation changes. Most issues we've seen stem from a lack of internal alignment and buy-in. Without a common purpose and goal, and without these roles defined, we've seen delays in the implementation process, a lack of efficiency during and after implementation, the lack of clarity and direction with a lot of spinning wheels with no traction. Time and again, we've seen that when the people involved in the setup or use of a new system don't understand the why and the how, they are not invested or motivated to contribute to the success of the implementation.
Great. So that feeds right into our next polling question for the audience. If you could please, again, click directly to your answer, and this time we're just going to pick one, to the question, do you think your organization has the right people to set up and use an RBM technology? Definitely, somewhat, or not at all. And again, you just click one and hit submit, click the answer that's best for you. Do you think your organization has the right people to set up and use an RBM technology? Definitely, somewhat, or not at all. And I'll just give you a couple more seconds to fill that out and hit submit. And then we'll take a look at your results. Okay. So thank you for participating, and the answers are majority is somewhat. So Amanda, did you want to speak to those results?
Yeah, and so actually, what's interesting here is that there's a higher percentage here of the definitely than what I was expecting. Most what we see when we're working with our customers is a mixture of that somewhat to not at all. And so this is actually really promising to see that we have such a high percentage that definitely feel that they already have the personnel. So that's great. All right, next we're going to talk about processes. So these are some of the items that we're going to cover in the following slides. We're going to talk overall scope, SOPs, communication, UAT, and general oversight. So thinking about your project scope. This is defining and documenting the who and the how for system setup and use. So first, how do you plan to use the system? Again, is this risk management, data checks, site management, safety review? This ties back to the consideration of who your end users will be. Again, without this defined early on, we've seen unnecessary time and expense spent post-implementation to make adjustments. And will you start with a pilot study? Most customers benefit greatly when starting with a pilot study. It allows you to familiarize yourself with the implementation process, test the system, and establish your internal processes on a smaller scale instead of jumping into implementations of multiple studies at once. It's also important, and you need to understand and define who will be doing what during setup and use of the system. So as an example here, we work with our customers and to walk through some kind of responsibility matrix like a RACI diagram, where you go through the different tasks or steps in the implementation and you establish who is responsible, who needs to approve, to be consulted, or to be informed. So as an example, when you're working through risk assessment, you would outline that the person that's overall responsible for risk assessment is your study manager, but then you'll need approval from a clinical director or your quality group. Then you'll need to make sure that a study team or statistics are consulted, and then your vendor would be informed of your risk assessment output. SOPs and plans. You'll need to ensure that the processes are in place for how to use, who will use, and what they will use. This typically involves reviewing existing SOPs, monitoring plans, training plans, quality management plans, and then, if necessary, updating them and/or creating new ones. So for example, you may need to update your current monitoring plan to reflect what CRAs are expected to do with output from the system. Like a certain site performance score determines the level of monitoring or SDV at a site. This information and guidance can be added to a monitoring plan. You can also document how alerts from the system are to be escalated internally, so that if the system notifies the CRA via an alert that the number of protocol deviations at a site is reaching a concerning level, that needs to be reported up to a manager. And your process for communication. How are you communicating to both your technology vendor and to your end users? So first we'll talk about your technology vendor. So you'll need to provide study specifics, your final study documentation, protocol, etc. And then things like your risk assessments, final database information like annotated CRFs. And this is all a part of the requirements gathering process. In addition to those study documents, you'll need to provide your vendor with requirements and specifications and how you want the system to look and behave. What do you want your end users to see and do? And then your impact on users. How will you communicate information to the intended end users of the system? How are they going to be trained? They'll need to understand how this fits into their daily job, whether that's via SOPs, work instructions, or plans. And how will your users know what to do with system outputs? Again, this can be in SOPs, work instructions, or your monitoring plans. And UAT. So this is an area that we found that most customers have not fully considered or really considered at all. First, you need to understand and decide what type of UAT you will complete. Is it going to be system level or study specific? At the system level, most technology vendors have already completed their own system level testing and validation. But does your company require its own validation of a new system? Or can you rely on the vendor's validation documentation? And for your study-specific configuration, this is where you're checking and reviewing the study-specific configuration in the system to ensure that it aligns with your specifications. So, are you planning to UAT at the system level and or the study-specific setup? If your answer is yes to either, you're going to need a UAT plan. Does your company have an existing UAT process to follow with documentation or templates? Do you have the people resources? Do you have data to use in testing? Will you use test data sets or real data from an existing study? Do you even have test data sets? If not, do you have resources to build those? These are all important questions, and overall, it's necessary to include the time and effort needed for UAT in your overall implementation timeline. And your oversight plan. This is the big picture. How will success and value be measured? Ideally, your oversight plan defines what it looks like when the right people are using the system in the right way. Are users using the system as intended? As an example, are risks being escalated appropriately and resolved? And what does successful use of the system look like? These are your success measures. An example of some success measures are fewer or shorter on-site visits, increased visibility into patient data and site performance, which results in fewer queries or protocol deviations, a reduction in audit findings, or reduced data cleaning time. Once these are defined and assessed, how will management or stakeholders be notified of your successes? And where do you go from there?
Great, thank you, Amanda. So audience, our next poll, your question is, has your organization conducted an SOP impact analysis for an RBM implementation? And your choices are, yes, we have planned one, we have one in progress, or not currently planned. And again, you just need to choose one and click on the submit button. Again, has your organization conducted an SOP impact analysis for an RBM implementation? Planned, in progress, or not currently planned? And we'll just give you a couple more seconds to answer that question. And thank you for participating in our poll. And our answers, oh, clicked them away. Here we go, back. Almost the majority, well, right. It is clearly the majority, almost 60% say not currently planned, the remainder in progress, and only 10% are planned. So Amanda, do you have any response to that?
Yeah, so that is very much in line with what we've seen with the customers we've engaged with. Typically, the SOP analysis piece is one of the things that tend to get overlooked or just isn't in the mindset when people are thinking about their RBM implementation. So we do a lot of work with our customers to look, kind of go through that change management piece. So this is very much in line with what we've seen in the industry. Okay, next we're going to focus on technology, and this mainly pertains to access to and transfer of data. Very rarely do we see one organization owning all of their data. In essentially every implementation, we see the need for a customer to access data from another party. So this means that most do not have direct access to all of their data in real time. They may only receive some data at a certain frequency, or it's provided in a certain format that they do not have control over. So who has control of your data? The first thing you need to ask yourself is, where is your data? Does all sit within your internal databases, or do you collect data using a third-party vendor, like a CRO, central lab, imaging, IVRS? If you use a vendor, how do you get at your data? If they send it to you, at what frequency do they send it? In what format? And if any of that needs to be adjusted or changed to fit in with your RBM strategy, does that mean that you need to have a contract amendment with that vendor? Another consideration is, do you need internal buy-in to share your data? An example would be getting approval from data management, approval to use blinded data, or approval from an internal privacy or regulatory group. If you're a CRO, do you need sponsored buy-in or contractual approval to share their data with a third-party tech vendor? We've seen instances where the CRO initiated an implementation with us, but during that process found that they actually did not have the approval that they needed to transfer their data. So there we were, mid-implementation. The CRO realizes that they do not have permission or contract coverage to share sponsored data with a third-party vendor. This brought the implementation to a halt for weeks, and in some cases, even months. Once you've established where your data is and that you have authority or permission to share, you then need to understand how that data will be transferred. How is it transferred to you from a vendor? And then how will you transfer to your RBM technology vendor? What needs to be in place for access to third-party vendor data? When it comes to you sharing your data, how do you want to do that? Via direct system-to-system connection, like an API, or would it be via file transfer? You'll also need to understand from your RBM technology vendor if the data needs to be in a certain format and other transfer specifications. And continuing with data transfer. Do you have a technical person who can access and transfer all of your data? If not, do you need someone? Also, do you have IT support for other technical set of items, like a single sign-on, which allows you to utilize your same network username and password with a new system so that you don't need to have yet another username and password for yet another system? And once you get all that worked out and you're transferring your data, what happens when there are changes to your databases? Ideally, you would minimize changes as much as possible, but we all know they still happen. So it's important to be mindful of the domino effect on other systems resulting from your database changes. Something as small as one database field name change on your end can cause an error with data upload into an RBM system. So you need to have a step in your process that involves communicating to your technology provider of planned database changes so that they can update on their end.
Great. We're going to get to our next poll. And that poll is, does your organization currently have adequate technical resources to support an RBM technology? And your choices are definitely, somewhat, or not at all. And just click on the answer most appropriate for you, and then click on submit. And again, the question is, does your organization currently have adequate technical resources to support an RBM technology? Definitely, somewhat, or not at all. And we'll just give you a couple more seconds to answer that question. And thank you again for participating in the poll. And our answers are somewhat is the majority. So our breakdown is definitely just a little bit over a quarter, somewhat, definitely over a half, and not at all, a little bit less than that. Amanda?
Okay. Yeah, so again, this is a little more positive, I would say, than what we've seen along the way. Yeah. So having that percentage, it definitely is great. I think it's showing a trend in the right direction for the industry. So that's good. Very positive to see. The somewhat, and having the somewhat as the highest, I would say that's in line with a lot of what we see as well, is people usually having to tweak or to add a little bit of support from the IT or technical perspective. Okay, so what does all this mean? In our experience, taking all these questions into consideration and planning ahead minimizes frustration and saves time. This ultimately leads to a smooth and successful implementation. And next, Crystal will review some ways in which technology can truly be your friend in your RBM journey.
Thank you, Amanda. So why go through all this effort? Because ideally, all of your hard work results in your ability to use technology to make your job easier, make communication easier, and allows you to see what you need to see when you need to see it. Your technology should be configurable and flexible, so the visualizations and actionable outputs you see provide you with the information you need. What we are going to show you in these remaining slides are just examples of how an RBM technology can be used. In this example, if you're trying to align with ICH E6R2, then a risk assessment might be part of your RBM process. Would it be helpful to your organization if the risk assessment was in your RBM technology? It was fully audit trailed and allowed you to not only list your mitigations, but allowed you to actually tie them or associate them to the data and analysis happening in the software. Wouldn't it be helpful if you received notifications when issues are identified? This could happen either during the analysis step within the software or while an end user is reviewing the visualizations. In this example, a positive pregnancy test was identified as an exclusion criteria, yet still data came in with a positive pregnancy test in the study. Your new friend technology should allow you to update and track the issue to closure and potentially allow you to assign the issue to a person on your team who might be the responsible party for getting that to resolution. You should have this capability whether the issue is found at the patient, site, or overall study level. When I was a CRA and a study manager, I would have loved to be able to see if the data coming into my study made sense, or to see if there were potentially missing information. In this example, I can easily see that reported adverse events and concomitant medications align. They make sense. And I can even see that the patient is taking medication for their pre-existing hypothyroidism. All of this can be reviewed without having to navigate to multiple different CRFs, and if an issue was identified, it can quickly be captured as a follow-up action. Your technology could show you information about a patient's trend across certain data or how they compare to other patients in the study. It could be helpful to have visualizations providing safety information about your product or additional details for particular adverse events of interest. In this example, you could gain insights about your CRA's workload, your site's performance, and your expected or unexpected adverse events across the study. You could also see your IRB EC approval info to help determine where delays are at a site, or to help make decisions about whether you reuse a site, an IRB, or an ethics committee in a future study. It could be useful to see how a site is performing in comparison to other study sites. This information can help focus resources or identify performance issues early so your study data is minimally impacted. Your RBM technology should allow you to not only see a compilation of your existing study data. This could come from EDC, CTMS, labs, wearables, and even electronic health records. But it also allows you to gather subjective information about your study, and this could be via a CRA or site personnel survey. This type of survey data can provide valuable information about a site's performance and may help determine if a site is reused in other studies within your organization. Our point in showing you all of these examples is not to say this is how you have to use an RBM technology. Instead, it's to give you examples of how the technology is being used and give you ideas for what you would want to see from your RBM software. What was just on those screens that I presented is really completely up to you what you see. Your options are limitless. But at the core, it takes arming yourself with the right foundation of people, processes, and technology to make your RBM technology your friend.
Great. Thank you, Crystal. So audience, we have one last polling question for you. How would you describe your current stage of RBM technology implementation? So you have no experience. You are currently searching for an RBM technology provider. You have selected a technology and you're in the middle of your implementation, or you are actively using RBM technology. And again, you want to choose the answer that is best for you and then click submit so that we can get those results together. To your question, again, how would you describe your current state of RBM technology implementation? No experience. We are currently searching for an RBM technology provider. We have selected a technology and are in the middle of an implementation, or we are actively using an RBM technology. And then you can hit submit. And then I think we might be going right into the Q&A, but first let's take a look at those results. Almost half have no experience with an RBM technology implementation. There's no one's looking at one, some are in the middle of one, and some are actively using. So, Crystal, did you want to comment, or do we want to go into the Q&A?
Yeah, I mean, I think whenever we talk about RBM technology with our customers, or I think just within the industry, this is a good representation of where the industry is in general.
Okay.
If the attendees were around 10 or 15 years ago when we went from using paper case report forms to EDC, where we are with RBM right now is very similar in that sense. So there was a pretty long transition period that happened, transitioning from paper CRFs to EDC, and this no experience with RBM technology is very similar. So there's a lot of people who are just trying to get familiar with what RBM is and thinking about how it would work with their organization, but not necessarily ready to put their toe in the water yet. So this is not really that surprising.
So it's our audience is representative of the larger industry.
Yeah,
that's great. Thank
definitely.
you, Crystal. And thank you, Amanda, for your informative presentations. Did you want to comment more? I'm sorry.
No, that's okay. I was just going to say basically no matter where you guys are in your RBM journey, Amanda and I wanted to thank you for joining us. And then I think we will hand it over to Lisa for any audience questions.
Excellent. Thank you. And thank you again for your informative presentations. Before we get started on the question and answer session, I would like to remind the audience how to submit questions. You can submit them by typing them in the Q&A box, which can be found on the right-hand side of your presentation window. And let's get started. I'm going to go into that little window. And let's see, our first question. When you are implementing RBM, who have you seen that is responsible for overseeing implementation? That's a good question.
Amanda, do you want to?
I'm not sure.
Take this one.
Yeah, sure. So I would say for the most part, we have seen someone within clinical operations or data management. Those have been the two biggest drivers and owners in overseeing the overall process. What we're actually starting to see more recently, and I think this again is as the industry is moving more into RBM and starting to integrate it more into their processes and sort of wrap their heads around it. We're actually starting to see more risk-based monitoring or quality management groups themselves within organizations that are separate from the clinical operations or the data management that are, really their full-time job within that group is to get this RBM process and strategy figured out and drive a technology to help with that process.
Excellent. All right, let's get to this next question. how have you seen companies handle changes within a study, so a change in a KRI or in the thresholds when using the system?
Amanda, do you want me to answer this one?
Yeah, sure. Sure, go ahead.
So I think within our system, the configuration changes are part of the user interface, meaning that someone from either our customer's organization who's been trained to make configurations in the system, or someone from our team that supports the customer can make those changes. So that's how we've seen companies, I guess, not only technically make the changes, but then we also allow our customers the ability to kind of test out changes in the system in a UAT environment. So if they wanted to adjust thresholds or add a new key risk indicator or potentially add a new data source that maybe wasn't available when we originally set up a study, we allow some viewing of that and some testing out of like I said, new KRIs or new thresholds in a UAT environment so that they can see the impact of that change prior to it actually being released into what we would call our production environment where the study is live. So that's typically, again, configurations could be done by the customer from an admin who's been trained, or can be done by us, but we do have a process in place that allows some earlier visibility to what that impact of the change would be without impacting the production study.
Excellent. Thank you, Crystal. And our next question, what have you seen to be the best measures of success?
I'll take this one. I would say, and this is going to sound, so really success measures ultimately depend on how the system is being used, which is different from company to company to company. So what's most important when you define your measure of a success, and I mentioned a couple in the presentation, that things like reduced or shorter monitoring visits, on-site monitoring visits, or reduced number of queries or protocol deviations. What your measure of success is needs to be specific to your organization and the needs of why you're using this RBM technology.
Excellent. Well, thank you both. We are going to wrap up our webinar today. It was very informative. We have questions that are coming in. We have some questions, but the presenters are going to get back to you separately offline. So I want to thank the audience for attending and for participating in today's event. I'd also like to thank our sponsor, Remarque Systems, for making today's educational webcast possible. And as I